All right, what is up, everybody? It's Matt Modi here with OddsJam, here to give you my favorite DFS plays for NFL Sunday Week 14. So I'm going to be using the OddsJam screen to find these plays. Now, the beauty of the OddsJam screen and of these DFS companies, using the OddsJam screen for these DFS companies, and I'm specifically talking about PrizePicks and Underdog, is the OddsJam screen pulls up where every sportsbook is pricing a market at, and then you can just use the sportsbooks to find pricing discrepancies to take advantage of them. So the perfect example of what I'm talking about here, and this is just between PrizePicks and Underdog, is look at the passing yardage difference in Ryan Tannehill from PrizePicks to Underdog. That's a 10-yard gap from these two books. So literally just middle them. Take the under on Underdog, take the over on PrizePicks, and obviously, if he lands between 191 and 200, you win both your player props, and you could do this all across the board. So some of them have bigger gaps than others. I probably need a bigger gap than these 2 yards right here and these 6 yards right here. But there was one that was just ridiculous, and it's just Jared Goff one right here. So Jared Goff at 260.5 passing yards on PrizePicks and 274.5 on Underdog. That's a 14-yard gap. Now, if you just wanted to take one of these, you didn't want to take both, you didn't want to middle it, totally fine. The Jared Goff over on PrizePicks is the clear play here. The reason why I know that, look at where every other sportsbook is pricing this. Every book except for BetRivers has this in the 270s. I mean, this one, BetRivers, is at 263. If you're just looking for a player prop straight up, this would also be a really good one to take Jared Goff over. It's 263.5 passing yards at BetRivers, because look at where the other books price it. BetMGM, 274. Caesars, 274. DraftKings, 274. And that's important because DraftKings is one of the sharpest sports books in the world in terms of pricing player props specifically. They do a really good job with player props. So getting it 11 yards higher on DraftKings, or I guess I should say DraftKings pricing it 11 yards higher than BetRivers is a good sign. Pinnacle, which is the sharpest sports book in the world, has it at 274.5. So same line as DraftKings. And then we see 270, 275. So this 263.5 is an insane outlier compared to the rest of the markets, compared to the rest of the sports books. So if you just wanted to take one, then I would recommend the PrizePicks one, like I mentioned. But for me personally, I think it makes sense to middle both of them. Like, that's a 15-yard gap between where PrizePicks and Underdog, where he could land. And if you hit the middle for both of them, which isn't outrageous, like, that's a 10-yard gap for the Ryan Tannehill one. That's from between 190 and 200. There's probably a 5 to 10% chance that he lands in between those two numbers, which in sports betting is a pretty big deal. Getting a middle opportunity at that big of a number is a pretty big deal. And then we see the Jared Goff one, 260 to 275, a 15-yard gap between these two. So again, I recommend middling both between the Jared Goff and the Ryan Tannehill one. And to keep in mind, this is just one market. So I found a total of 4 player props to lock in for these DFS companies. The over on Ryan Tannehill and Jared Goff on PrizePicks, and the under on Ryan Tannehill and Jared Goff on Underdog. 2 plays for each one that I think are really good, that I think is a really good way. The Jared Goff one is up here, excuse me. Really good way to find profitable DFS plays using the OddsJam screen. And like I said, I've just talked about one market. If you want to go to receiving yards, you can find plays here as well, both for DFS specifically, and then also just for like straight up betting opportunities as well, like this Jared Goff one. Really, really good value getting this Jared Goff one at 263.5. So now if we want to look at player receiving yards, we can do that as well and see where we can find some value. So the player receiving yards is pulled up here. Again, you want to look for differences across the sports books. So the numbers are going to be at a little bit of a bigger gap, specifically on player passing yards, because obviously the passing yards are the highest. But I mean, here we see this isn't DFS specific, but we see a good play on an under receiving yards for KJ Osborne. We're getting it at 24.5, and every other book has it at 23.5. and Pinnacle heavily favors it going under at 23.5. So not as big of a gap as the 15 yards we found on Jared Goff, but also these numbers are significantly lower. So 1 yard for receiving yards as low as 23.5 is obviously a bigger deal than 1 yard for player passing yards. So a couple things to keep in mind when you are using these, using the OddsJam screen to find profitable player props. So you can go through and find good ones. Like here's a good under for Isaiah McKenzie for Underdog specifically. DraftKings and Pinnacle have it at 30. We are getting it at 32. Stuff like that is what you should be looking out for. But for this video specifically, the 2 player passing yards ones are my absolute favorite. Those are awesome. So definitely make sure, I definitely recommend, I should say, to middle those. And that's going to be it. So I appreciate you guys watching and have a good one.